Hi everybody, my name is Mark Cunliffe from Craggy Range Vineyards in New Zealand. It's lovely to meet you all, thank you for having me. And I'm here in Seoul as a guest of the beautiful team at Keumyang, who now represent us in Korea. So a little bit of history and information on Craggy Range. Craggy Range was planted in 1998 and we first planted in the Hawke's Bay region of the North Island of New Zealand. Craggy Range was founded by Mr. Terry Peabody and the Peabody family. And when the family set about finding a great site to create a great vineyard and one of the great wineries of the world, they spent a bit of time searching around the world through Bordeaux, through the Napa Valley, even into Western Australia to Margaret River. And it was a chance meeting with a viticulturalist in New Zealand, his name is Steve Smith, who guided the family to purchase some land in an area now known as the Gimlet Gravels. At the time, that area hadn't really been established for viticulture. We were one of the first group of winemakers to establish ourselves in the land previously owned by the Gimlet family and now known as the Gimlet Gravels. So this was 1998. And in the Gimlet Gravels, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we farm Chardonnay, Bordeaux Reds, and fortuitously we planted a little bit of Syrah as well. And at the time there was very little Syrah grown in New Zealand, so we're all happy we did because Syrah is really exciting the world from New Zealand, I think. The following year, in 1999, we also purchased land in the Tamuna Valley. The Tamuna Valley is 7 kilometres south of Martinborough, the township of Martinborough, and about 70 metres higher as well. And the Martinborough township, just outside of Wellington, if you could drive there directly, it'd be about 20 minutes, but it's over a mountain range, so it takes about an hour and a half, but a beautiful part of New Zealand, the bottom tip of the North Island. And in that beautiful location on 2 terraces, we planted white aromatics on the lower terrace, mostly Sauvignon Blanc, a little bit of Riesling and Pinot Gris as well. And then on the top terrace, a tapestry of Dijon clone Pinot Noir, which New Zealand had access to from 1999 onwards, so it was perfect. These 2 wines are from our Tamuna vineyard in Martinborough, and that region is in the bottom tip of the North Island of New Zealand. It's the driest region in the North Island of New Zealand, and it's also the windiest. It receives a lot of wind, either directly south from Antarctica, and those winds hit the Southern Alps and bounce into Wellington and the Martinborough area. And either that or they're northeasterlies from the South Pacific, but mostly a very cool region. The region is very famous for Pinot Noir. It was planted in the 1980s, and the Tamuna Valley was developed in the 90s after that. And we planted first in 1999. On 2 terraces, the bottom terrace is planted to Sauvignon Blanc, a little bit of Riesling and a little bit of Pinot Gris, mostly Sauvignon Blanc. It's the original clone of Sauvignon Blanc that came into New Zealand in the 1970s from the University of California, Davis, and probably into California before that from the Le Solus family in Bordeaux back in the 1800s. So it's that original clone that's formed all the way to New Zealand, and is the dominant clone of Sauvignon Blanc throughout the country. With the very cold temperatures in Martinborough, and a little bit of altitude, we often pick 3 weeks after Marlborough, even though we're at the same latitude. So that speaks to how cold Martinborough is. So we often have a lot of high acid in our wines, and to balance that out, we use a little bit of barrel fermentation. So about 10% of our Sauvignon Blanc is fermented in French oak, and that gives the wine a more textural feel, mouth feel. It's a little richer in the palate. And consequently one of the most elite Sauvignon Blancs in New Zealand, and it actually can age quite well as well, but designed to be drunk in the first 3 years. Lots of passion fruit, obviously, typical Sauvignon Blanc, but more into sort of nettle and green grass and those sort of characters with a round, rich palate. So very, very delicious. Aside from this wine, on the top terrace, we make our Keumyang Pinot Noir. When we planted that vineyard in 1999, we planted 12 clones of Pinot Noir. We don't use all of them, we use about 8 of them, and we farm each clone separately and often make separate fermentations for each clone. Finish those wines and then blend them back to make Keumyang Pinot. So sometimes in many years we make up to 40 separate ferments of Pinot Noir before blending back. So a very intensive process. The clones are the Dijon clones, which came to New Zealand in 1999, as I said, and also the original clone called the Abel clone, which came in through France in the 80s. We only use French oak, as does most of the New Zealand industry. We only use French oak at Craggy range, and increasingly using a larger percentage of whole bunch fermentation as well. We're extending our élevage into barrel a bit longer now, about 14 months in barrel. And generally the barrels are about 30% new for this wine. We've had an exceptional set of vintages recently in New Zealand through 19, 20, 21. This is the 22 release, just arriving in Korea. It's another very, very strong wine. So now we're in the Gimlet Gravels appellation in the North Island of New Zealand, in a greater region called Hawke's Bay. Hawke's Bay is one of the great wine regions of New Zealand and planted in the 1980s, generally speaking. We planted in 1998, and at that time the Gimlet Gravels, the land had not been developed for viticulture. And a mining company actually wanted the land to mine for river stones. And essentially the area is an exposed riverbed. In 1867 there was an earthquake, the river changed course and drained and left a large area of land, about 800 hectares of free draining river stones. So essentially 40 meters deep of free draining river stones. So the mining company wanted this land, as you can imagine. But in the end, a group of winemakers and potential vignerons joined together and fought the mining company, and we managed to win, and we then planted the Gimlet Gravels. The vineyard is a fascinating vineyard. It's 800 hectares in total. There's about 25 growers on the vineyard, and we're lucky to have just on 100 hectares of the 800. And we planted Bordeaux Reds, which was seen to be the great opportunity for the Gimlet Gravels. The heat summation in the vineyard is very similar to Bordeaux. We planted Chardonnay, and fortuitously we planted a little bit of Syrah. And at the time there was very little Syrah grown in New Zealand, and we're very happy that we did, because Syrah turned out to be something very exciting off the gravels. The vineyard is extraordinary. Every centimetre is planted out now, and it is literally the most expensive viticultural land in New Zealand. It's actually also the warmest vineyard in New Zealand. And when I say warm, it's not hot on a global basis. It's warm. Compared to many other countries, it's quite cool. And only reaches 30 degrees Celsius just a handful of times each year, usually around February, maybe 6, 7, 8 days touch 30 degrees. So that's quite a cool region globally, but for New Zealand, it's the warmest vineyard in New Zealand. The nature of the heat in the vineyard is quite interesting as well, because 40 meters of river stones on the surface, these stones during the day, they heat up in the sun, and they stay warm at night time and radiate back on the vines overnight to stimulate ripening. So while we pick quite late, often in sort of April, often in May it's been, we slowly build up our sugars to around 13% alcohol. So the wines around Syrah, for example, tend to look quite Rhone Valley or quite French in style. And our Bordeaux blends, always dominated by Merlot, tend to look quite European and feel, if we're allowed to say, quite Bordeaux-ish. We make several Chardonnays off the vineyard as well. This is probably our most famous and our most elite Chardonnay, Gimlet Gravels Chardonnay. Combination of Clone 95 and Mendoza clone, and fermented in French oak with wild yeast, and about 25% of the barrels are new as well. Plush but minerally. We always have that sort of wet stones, sort of minerally feel to the wines as well. Syrah is one of the great success stories for New Zealand, and this is part of that story. This wine has almost a cult following around the world. It's quite a small production. It's a Syrah that presents as delicate and pretty and floral with purity of fruit and depth and structure. It's very different to the Syrahs produced in warmer regions around the world, for example, the Barossa or the Napa Valley. And this wine has much more in keeping with the Rhone Valley, the Northern Rhone wines. Structured, perfumed, very spicy, absolutely glorious. Off the site, our Bordeaux program, it starts with Tikahu. And Tikahu is a blend of all five Bordeaux varietals. The dominant variety always been Merlot. And let's pour some here. Merlot was always thought to be the great opportunity in the Gimlet gravels, given the heat structure is very similar to Bordeaux. We always blend a little bit of Petit Verdot, Malbec, Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon into this blend, and then keep in barrel for about 14 months. So it's an austere, dry, minerally expression, quite Bordeauxish in feel, and as you can imagine, you know, plum, minerals, sort of tar, those sort of characters as well. So again, a beautiful expression and very much our sort of our house red. This is our Hawke's Bay Rosé, 2023 vintage, and just arrived in Korea. This is one of New Zealand's most elite rosés. It's quite a small production. And the 2023 is 100% Merlot off our Gimlet Gravels vineyard in Hawke's Bay. We pick the fruit and we leave the skins in contact with the juice for about 3 hours, just to seep out a little bit of cover to give it that beautiful sort of salmon coloured hue. And then it spends about 6 months in tank before we send to bottle. Super fresh, but really interesting and complex in the palate. Orange blossom, strawberry, lavender, Provençal herbs. The wine is just delicious over summer especially, and match with things like salmon or seafood. There's not a lot of rosé grown out of Hawke's Bay, and we tend to specialise in Merlot. It's a little bit different to some of the other rosés you see from New Zealand, many of them coming out of Marlborough, for example, and those wines are often made from Pinot Noir. So our wine tends to be more savoury in feel and a little bit richer, even though it has great delicacy and finesse. Hawke's Bay is about 4 hours north of Marlborough, and is much, much warmer. Marlborough, low altitude. Hawke's Bay also low altitude, but inland from the coast as well. So it's a little bit warmer and we can develop richer flavours. I think this is a beautiful release. This is probably the best rosé we've made at Craggy range. And as you see, we love the colour of this wine. We love the aromatics, and there's enough interest in the wine to make it a serious, complex rosé that matches beautifully with food as well. So this is Tikahu, which is our Bordeaux blend. We make this from the 5 Bordeaux varieties. It's Merlot dominant with Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Malbec and Petit Verdot. Tikahu, the name, originates from an ancient Maori myth. We have a mountain right behind the winery called Te Mata Peak, and often that peak is surrounded by mist. In Te Reo Maori, the myth is the mist that surrounds Te Mata Peak, and in ancient Maori history this represents a cloak and it lays over top of a sleeping Maori chief. If you look at Tomato Peak behind the winery, it looks like the shape of a Māori chief sleeping, and the mist is talked about as the cloak or the blanket that sleeps over top of him. It's a beautiful wine and can age for 10 to 15 years in the cellar, but designed to be drunk in the first 7 or 8 years perfectly while it's fresh and vibrant. This is Craggy Range Sophia. This wine has a cult following in New Zealand. It's one of New Zealand's most iconic releases. It's very collectible and quite rare, and usually sells out on the day we release it in New Zealand. So this is one of New Zealand's iconic releases, one of the very top wines around New Zealand, only made in great years. The wine asks for 15 to 20 years in the cellar. It can be approached young. Highly aromatic. It's a soft, gentle but structured wine, austere and minerally and beautifully perfumed, like the great Bordeaux's of great vintages like 2021. Plum, Christmas cake, brioche, lavender, those sort of characters. It's a wine that will age gracefully over time, and this wine looks magnificent over the first 20 years of its life. The fruit for Sophia is farmed from extremely low yielding blocks within the Gimlet Gravels. We farm this vine mostly organically, and the fruit for Sophia comes from just a few rows within our best blocks of Merlot and a few rows in our best blocks of Cabernet Franc in relation to 2021. It's a highly anticipated release every year, and around the world sells out almost immediately. We're delighted to have this wine at Keumyang in Korea. Thank you. Craggy Range is one of the most renowned wineries in New Zealand. It's in a 1,000-year trust owned by the Peabody family. It will never be sold outside of the family for 1,000 years. We were a pioneering vineyard in single vineyard cultivation in New Zealand. And I would add that in 25 years, we're picking our 25th vintage now. We've come from very, very small to very, very important very quickly. On a global stage, Craggy Range is now thought of as New Zealand's Grand Cru New Zealand producer.